Folks, I decided to run for the U.S. Senate because I recognize we've got a major crisis on our hands. We are well past the tipping point in this debt crisis, and Washington continues to do things that we simply cannot afford. Since I've been up here, there are 4 words that I hardly ever hear in the halls of Congress, and those are, we cannot afford it. Washington collected last year $3.3 trillion, but we spent over $3.7 trillion. That means the government spent nearly $450 billion it did not have. As a matter of fact, over the last 7 years, Washington spent $25 trillion running the federal government. I can't even relate to how big that is. What I can understand is of that $25 trillion, we borrowed $9 trillion. Also, how little oversight Washington exerts in deciding how to spend this money is just as outrageous. Today, Congress only budgets 30% of what the government spends. The other 70% of government spending is mandatory. This 70% of mandatory spending pays for things like Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and interest on the federal debt. The other 30% of what Washington spends is considered discretionary, and all of this money is borrowed. In fact, every dollar our government is spending on our military is borrowed. Every dollar we spend on foreign aid is borrowed. Folks, we're at the point where we cannot afford everything that we continue to do. We cannot afford to spend money on education for our kids. We cannot afford to spend money on repair our crumbling infrastructure. We cannot afford to spend money on our military. But folks, those are things that we absolutely have to have. So we need to deal with our priorities. But you know, all of this hasn't stopped Washington's spending. The federal government hasn't said, hey, wait a minute, we can't afford to do all of this. And the result today is we have $19 trillion of debt, and worse, we have over $100 trillion of future unfunded liabilities coming at us because of things Washington has already committed to. Having been through the budget process now 1 full year, I now get it. The budget process itself is broken and so perverse that the only release valve is to spend more money, which is exactly what Washington's been doing and continues to do. Yeah, there is a better way. It's what businesses, families, you and I all have to do every month. We ask ourselves a simple question: can we afford it? And that's what's missing in Washington. When we get our paycheck back home, we allocate money to the things we don't have a choice over. We pay the mortgage, the car payment, the light bill, the gas bill. We pay those first. Then we look at what's left and decide whether we're eating hamburgers or steaks for the rest of the month. That's what the federal government is not doing. And so the result of all that is that 100% of our discretionary spending is borrowed, if you look at the last 7 years. But folks, the way forward is very simple. We can fix this fiscal mess, starting with the budget process by allocating against our priorities. To do this, we need to bring all mandatory spending under the budget process. We can save Social Security. We can grow the economy. We can reduce the number of redundant agencies. And yes, we can finally get spiraling healthcare costs under control. If we do this, we would set up the next 50 years to be an even greater period of economic growth than the previous 70 years for our children and our grandchildren. It's not too late. But we're already well into this debt crisis, and it threatens our very ability to defend our country. We can solve this. We've done it before. But we simply have to get started facing the fact that sometimes we simply cannot afford it.